Alright, it's time to take a look at the last heavy assault cruiser, although ironically this is the first one that I started flying. Now my original goal with the Stabber 2 was to make it work like the Vagabond, and I did succeed at that goal. My Stabber 2 does work like the Vagabond. I already used it in solo PvP, and honestly I'm very impressed by how it handles and how the ship performs. Now with the last big update, all of the heavy assault cruisers have been improved, and it will be very interesting to see how this ship has changed. I'm also very excited to fly the Stabber 2. Let's go to basic info. The rate description: raw bonus plus 5 seconds damage control activation time. Advanced medium can operation bonus will give you plus 10% medium can accuracy fall-off, minus 6% medium can activation time. Advanced cruiser command bonus will give you plus 5% flight velocity, and the advanced cruiser defense upgrade will give you plus 5% shield EM and plus 3% shield thermal resistance. Overall pretty solid. Should be really tanky. The Stabber has 1 drone, 5 high slots, 3 medium slots, 5 low slots, 3 combat and 3 engineering rigs. The defense is overall really solid, 17,000. The Stabber 2 is primarily a shield tank. The capacitor is 2470 gigajoules, capacitor recharge time 558 seconds, maximum recharge rate 11.07 gigajoule per second. It can lock 7 targets. Now the signature radius is 70 meters, which I believe is the smallest out of the 4 assault cruisers, and this ship is also known for its speed. The Stabber 2 is ridiculously fast, one of the fastest cruisers in the game. It's actually faster than the Cinnabon, which is a very nice thing. Okay, now let me show you the build that I have on this ship. So, almost 600 DPS with the classic C-type autocannons. Now they have a very nice optimal range and a very nice 20km accuracy fall-off, and of course decent tracking. In the medium slots I have 1 Scrambler, 1 large Nosferatu and 1 Web, the classic setup that I run on my cruisers. And in the low slots 1 Afterburner, large booster, dual adaptives and a damage control. Again, very nice combination on the tier 10 assault cruisers. Now for the rigs, this is where I did decide to go and try something new out. Now I have dual 2P combat integration modules, and they're both focused on resistance and shield booster performance. One improves the shield booster cycle while the other improves the activation time. Now this will have a big impact on the capacitor, that is true. And in the third rig I have 1 4P integration module. This rig focuses on resistance and of course on activation time. So this is a very capacitor heavy build, but it will recover shield very good. Now in the engineering rigs I have decided to do a combination of power grid, capacitor and auxiliary thrusters. However, I don't really see much improvement in the capacitor, even with the capacitor rigs. Now I have 40,000 hit points, cold, 9,200 shield, on overall really solid cold shield stats. Now I just want to show you my Stabber 2 that I use actively for PvP. It's this ship right here. Now the DPS is a little bit less, 554.90, which is to be expected, but the build is basically following the same principle. Now we don't really need to have expensive rigs. When I bought this ship I wanted it to be cheap, and this build that I use right here so far hasn't disappointed me. It runs really well, and I'm quite happy with this current ship. Little bit less shield, little bit less overall hit points, that's okay. Didn't really notice a major difference in combat. And this is the current module layout. I have 1 tracking computer because I like to orbit outside of the web and scramble range against big ships. The speed tank is really solid on the Stabber 2, and surprisingly this Stabber 2 has a much better capacitor than the previous one, which is honestly to be expected because this build is not as capacitor heavy as the previous one, and I also like to use this setup with dual adaptives. It's really tanky because I already have the sleeper core. The sleeper nano core is the best nano core that you can use on the heavy assault cruisers. And now let me undock and let me show you how this ship looks. This is my PvP stabber that you could see me use in a couple videos ago. Okay, now let me turn everything on. I already did solo PvP with this ship. Was really fun, and I plan on continuing that. 83, 84, 76 and 80% resistance, which is honestly pretty solid if we consider the fact that this is a very cheap build on this stabber. I thought about making it more expensive, but honestly so far it does work really well, so I plan to keep on using this build. Overall, honestly, this ship has really surprised me at how well it works. Okay, now let me show you the other stabber. This is the more expensive one, and let me show you the stats of this ship. Now the difference will be there. You will notice the hit point difference. That's because of the implants. The implants do increase the shield, hull and armor stats by a little bit. And of course over here that's maybe in the extreme, but in the end it's not going to be a big difference in a real scenario. 66,000 hit points, 82, 84, 83 and 80% resistance on the shield, which is honestly almost about the same as the stats that I have on the cheap stabber. However, the speed will be vastly improved, and this is mainly because of the general units that I have on the implant. I have the barrage implant on this ship, still working on the units for the other stabber. With the barrage you have 2.2 thousand DPS, which honestly is pretty solid. For a tanky build you get solid DPS and solid tank. Very nice. With the damage control, almost 200,000 hit points, 94, 94, 94 and 93%, and with the sleeper core active, the defense is 396,000, which is honestly battleship level tank. This will last for about 48 seconds, honestly more than enough time to win a fight. And with the barrage implant your DPS will be 1.7 thousand because the sleeper core does reduce the DPS by a little bit. However, the drones are not affected by the sleeper core, which is a very interesting little fact. The rest of the ship stats look the same. The capacitor is not capacitor stable with the sleeper core, which is a little bit worrying, and that is because of the capacitor heaviness of the build. Now you can use a build like this with a large neutralizer and a capacitor battery. However, you will still see that the window shows 27 seconds on the capacitor, 23 seconds with this build. Really not capacitor stable. Even the sleeper core might not be able to make the capacitor stable with this build, but it will still help at recovering your own capacitor when your target's capacitor is down, which is a big bonus. Now I like to use this build when I fight a tanky cruiser or tanky battlecruiser because you can safely orbit outside of web and scramble range while avoiding all damage, and with the large neutralizer you will neutralize the capacitor of the target, and that will neutralize their tank. This is a Blood Raider tactic that does work on ships with sleeper cores and with capacitor batteries, because you have a big capacitor to use with the capacitor battery, so you can easily recover that. Okay, now let me see how this looks when everything is active. 52,000 hit points, 73, 76, 75 and 71. With this build you will have to rely on the speed to keep your ship alive, and that will also mean that you should avoid web and scramble range. So picking the right target will be very important. 33.43 kilometer range with the tracking computer active, 93 is the tracking, 5.18 is the optimal range. Honestly, pretty solid. Should be able to hit targets even at 20 kilometers without a problem. Although I would honestly orbit at about 17 or 18 kilometers just to be safe. You can also run a dual web build with a capacitor battery. With this build I will also rely on the speed to keep the ship alive. This ship is a very nice speed tank. And of course we can also use a scrambler. Let me show you how this build looks. With a build that doesn't have a lot of tank, with a build that does rely on speed to keep you alive, you really have to pick the right target. For example, I would not fight Blood Raider ships and Serpentis ships with a Stabber 2 because those two ships easily counter a Stabber 2. However, anything else is going to be a pretty easy target, including battleships, because some battleships have very poor tracking and they are not going to be able to track the ship moving at 1.8 kilometers per second at about 18 kilometers, 17 kilometers, and you will have enough tracking and enough DPS to destroy them. Okay, now what do we have here? Capacitor 3 minutes and 2 seconds. This is much better. This is with the sleeper core active. Well, actually, the other cruisers had their capacitor stable, while this ship doesn't have the capacitor stable. I blame my rigs for that. I think my rigs are a little bit too capacitor heavy, but it will be very fun to see how they will work when I start flying the ship in a mission later on, because I'm very curious to see what's the actual capacitor status when everything is running. Now you can see that the shield booster has a very nice cycle time. It does recover shield very quickly, but in return it will also use a lot of capacitor. It does recover a lot of shield, but uses a lot of capacitor in return.
Docking request accepted.
Which means that the ship can run really well at hit and on operations. Now you can also go with a dual propulsion build. I haven't used a dual propulsion build in a very long time. Last time I did that was with the Cinnaball and with the RB. Nowadays I use only the afterburner or micro updrive, mostly because of the other modules that I use on my ships. But this build should be pretty interesting. You use the micro updrive to tackle and the afterburner to orbit at 0, for example. Works really well when the target is a battleship. Battleships at close range don't have a lot of tracking, even if you're webbed. With the afterburner you should be still outpacing the tracking of the large turrets, so that way you can avoid damage. However, Battlegorns, Vindicators avoid those ships because they have a nasty bonus on webs and they will kill your cruiser if they catch you. However, this current build has a lot of hit points, 79,000. This is because I use a passive tank, 19,000 in shield because of the large shield booster. You can also use the passive tank on the ship really well. It runs, I would say, really good, especially with the damage control and with the sleeper core, and this opens a lot of possibilities with this ship. 3.3 kilometers per second with the micro updrive and of course you can make that even faster. Like I said, you can get up to 6 kilometers, above 6 kilometers per second with the Stabber 2. And when you reach the target, when the target is tackled, you turn off the micro warp drive and you go and swap to the afterburner to maintain a orbit. When you activate the extender, you get about 45% extra shield. The capacitor battery gives you a lot of extra capacitor. I recommend that you use the capacitor battery before you use the shield, so that your main capacitor is about the same capacity as before, and the transition to the afterburner is super smooth. You have to time that really well if you don't want to get slingshotted or if you don't want to lose
Docking
speed.
request accepted.
And overall, I believe that there is a lot of possibilities with the dual propulsion build. Now you can also use a dual scrambler build. This is when you have to fight targets with a lot of warp core stabs. You can replace the capacitor battery with a adaptive, and you get a really solid passive PvP Stabber 2. I really have to try out this build because it does look really nice, and I believe that it would work really nice. However, in my case, with this ship I did prefer to have a more active tank, because when I fight a tanky target, in the end it is a endurance battle, so you have to have a active tank in order to... Oh, that's a lot of hit points. 107,000 hit points. 80, 82, 81 and 78. With the sleeper core, the stats should be 214,000. Okay, well this is a pretty tanky stabber. And of course you also get the extended effect when you activate it, which is nice. Now what was I about to say? In a endurance battle it really is important to have an active tank, because in the end the ship without capacitor will end up losing. With a passive tank you basically have to kill the target before your shield or armor runs out. So not really suitable in a longer engagement. However, if you have
Docking
high DPS, then a passive tank is definitely the way to go. Now, I also have one Nosferatu over here that can help with the capacitor, 5 minutes and 2 seconds, which is honestly okay. And you can also use a build like this with a damage control, dual adaptives, damage control, and the large extender, dual webs, and a scrambler. 62,000 hit points, 58, 62, 61, and 54%. Well, time to show the barrage implant setup. Now, for barrage, you have a couple different setups. If you run full DPS with gyro stabilizers, you go with the gyro stabilizers units. If you run a tank, then you focus the units on tank. The main units should be shield booster optimization or shield booster output boost. If you use a passive tank, then the extender can also work really well. For an active tank, capacitor batteries, afterburners, Nosferatus, all that is very important. And this is basically how I have my units laid out over here. They focus on active tanking, and the capacitor is 4 minutes and 47 seconds. 21,000 shield because of the extender unit. You can actually combine the units to suit both builds, so you don't have to change much, although in my case I do change a lot. That way I always have the right units for the right build. Okay, now the big question, how much tank can I get out of this ship? Can I get over 500,000? If I do get 500,000, I'll be happy. 129,000, 82, 84, 83 and 80%, 21,000 shield. A really tanky stabber indeed. Okay. Now, I'm thinking about changing the rigs, but I think it should be about the same. You still get really good speed. Now you can technically increase that, so you get a super tank and you get ridiculous high speeds. There is so much possibilities that you can do with this ship. 2.2 thousand DPS, 129,000 hit points, and 1.8 kilometer per second speed. You know, I'm checking all the boxes here. I have tank, I have DPS, I have speed. 382,000 hit points with the primary damage control and with the secondary damage control. Yep, yeah, this is a little bit too much, honestly. 764,000 hit points on a cruiser. You know, if you don't want your ship to die, then this is the build to go. This thing ain't dying anytime soon. And it's a passive tank. If you have a logistic ship at your side, you can just laugh at anything. Honestly, this is just ridiculous. And I honestly wanted about like 550,000, but nope, 764,000. Well, perhaps next time I'll try to hit 1,000,000, because I believe I can hit 1,000,000 with ease. This is such a ridiculous ship. I love it. I like to build ridiculous ships that perhaps I will use into PvP, because you know, I just like to do crazy things like that. Okay, now you can also use a build like this. This build will mean that you will orbit at about 16-17 kilometers, basically outside of the web and scramble range. Now, you might ask me, which one of these builds do I like the most? Now, since I like to fly this ship like the Vagabond is a active shield tank. The ship has a 7.5% bonus on shield boost amount. So if I want to fly this ship as a Vagabond, then I would go with a active tank. However, the Vagabond also has a passive tank with extra large extenders, which is also inspiration for a build that I show you here. So in the end, it really does depend on the situation that you're at. Now, if you go passive tank, then you don't really have to go with the extra resistance stats with the adaptives. You can easily slap one or two adaptives, one or two gyro stabilizers with the damage control. And if you have the barrage implant, then go with the gyro stabilizer units. That way you can maximize your DPS. With a passive build, with a passive tank, your goal is to destroy the target before the target destroys you, and the damage control and extender is basically there to just withstand some of the damage that the target might throw at you. But in the end, with a passive tank, you go maximum DPS. Now, if you're like me, and if you want to build a ship that is going to last for a very long time in a fight, basically a endurance fight, then a build with the adaptives, damage controls, basically this build that you see here is the way to go. Now, this is the build that I use on my ship, and honestly, so far no issues with it. I did have several variations of the same build. I was basically adapting the build to the target. I did fight one Drake for about like 50 minutes. It was one of the most fun fights that I've had in a very long time. Eventually I did win, but in the fight against that Drake, if I had a neutralizer, I would have won the fight a lot sooner. So in the end, it really does depend on the target, and it depends on the pilot. Of course, since EVE is a big rock, paper, scissors game, there will be ships that will counter this ship, and you will have to learn to avoid those ships. Now, what ships are going to be a threat to a endurance build Stabber 2? Let's say a Ashmu, because, well, it's obvious the Ashmu has the superiority in webs and the superiority in Nosferatu performance. It will kill your capacitor and basically make your ship move like a brick, so avoid those Blood Raider ships. A Vigilant can also be a threat, however, if you build full DPS and if you go a passive tank with the extender and damage control, then the Vigilant might be in trouble. However, again, in the end, it does depend on the player, and not all Vigilant pilots will be the same. Some of them will be easy targets, some of them will not be easy targets. That's the beauty of this game. Now, I personally like to hunt big ships with the Stabber. Battlecruisers are my ideal targets with this ship. Frigates also can be really nice, but primarily I like to hunt big ships, battlecruisers, battleships. Against battlecruisers, I didn't have much of a problem. However, you have to be careful not to let the neutralizer kill your own capacitor. Drone boats should be I would say a very fun target, however they can also be quite challenging. I'm trying to think of some of the targets that are going to be a threat. Ships with high tracking might be problematic, although if you have a good tank, then you don't have nothing to worry about, because they are not going through the tank of this ship. Keep in mind, you have a very small signature radius, so tracking this ship will be very difficult, and you will have to take advantage of that against some of the assault battlecruisers. And against some of the assault battlecruisers, you have to maintain an orbit that will leave you outside of their webs. Now, one thing that I almost forgot to mention: be careful with ships that show blue fireworks. You might be wondering, what is this guy talking about? What blue fireworks? Well, I'm talking about the command burst modules. Skirmish command burst can increase web and scrambler range of the combat battlecruisers by about 2 or 3 kilometers. So they could technically web and scramble your ship at about 16, 17, in some cases up to 20 kilometers. So if you notice that, then make sure that you adjust your orbit to your maximum fall-off distance, which should be about 22 kilometers. And this is the reason why I also like to use the ship with the track computer. I can safely orbit on that range, and I still have really good damage applications, still have very good range, and overall still have very good tracking. Now, since you're talking about tracking, you can see here that I did slow my ship down by 45%. And you might wonder, why did I do that? Well, the truth is, in order to improve tracking. For most fights, for most big ships, you don't really have to go full speed around them, except if you're webbed. If you're webbed, then yeah, you will have to go full speed in order to avoid as much damage as possible. But if you are orbiting outside of the web and scrambler range, and if the target has problems tracking you, then you can easily slow down your ship. It will improve your tracking, and it will improve the damage that your target is taking. So that's also one trick that you can use. Of course, make sure not to slow down your ship to the point where the target is faster than you. You have to manually adjust the speed to be faster than your target, which should not be that difficult if your target is a big ship. However, some of the big ships can also be quite fast, so you have to account for that as well. Have to know how fast each ship can go. Now, is this ship a good learning ship? I would say if you plan to learn different tactics, if you plan to learn how to manually pilot and how to overall fly the Stabber, I would say the Stabber fleet, the tier 6 Stabber, is a perfect ship for that job. The Stabber 2 is a little bit more expensive, is a little bit more different, it's fast. That's one thing that I just have to mention, it's very fast. And overall does feel a little bit different from the Stabber fleet in a good way, because before the balance patch there wasn't really much of a reason to go buy this ship. I did get this ship because, well, I just wanted something new to fly, and it was a very good decision to go get this ship, because now it's actually a very scary little beast, and I really plan to see what I can do with it. Lately I've been a little bit stuck with some of the other ships, because, well, each time I try to do something else, every time I leave our home system, someone decides to camp. Every damn time I leave that gate for 5 minutes, the second I look back, there is a camp over there that needs to be smashed. So that's why I've been a little bit busy with the big ships. But yeah, when that's cleared out, which hopefully will happen very soon, then I'll be rolling the cruisers like in the good old days, because, man, I always say that I'm a cruiser pilot, and I still am a cruiser pilot primarily. I have skills for cruisers, all on level 5 basically. So yeah, I'm going to be flying this ship and many other cruisers. Also looking forward for some of the new factions that will be released at one point. We had some very, let's say, very nice kills lately. So we need new ships, because at the moment we killed all of the ships in the game. There ain't a ship that we haven't killed, with the big exception of capsule ships. I don't really count them, because they're rare and not something that you see quite often. Well then, what are my impressions of the Stabber 2? This thing is wild. This thing is wild, honestly. They did a fantastic job with the heavy assault cruisers, and I believe that this is just the tip of the iceberg. There is going to be more. I can guarantee you, they will change these ships more, and as time goes on, the heavy assault cruisers, the tier 10 cruisers, will have their own, I guess, their own thing, and they will have their own position. Overall, like I said, with the previous ships, with the previous heavy assault cruisers, I'm very happy with the direction that they headed with these ships, and I'm definitely looking forward for the potential new stats that they might receive. So with that being said, hope that you enjoyed. Stay safe, play safe, and as always, I'll see you next time.